The movie begins with a young man named Manu working at his family's beautiful Hawaiian hotel. Having been appointed as the manager recently, Manu is determined to preserve his culture and take care of the resort simultaneously. As everyone excitedly congratulates him for his hard-earned success, Manu begins to reminisce about his favorite childhood memories. The scene now shifts to a flashback, which shows Manu's parents eagerly announcing the opening of their new family-run resort. With the aim of taking their small hotel to great heights, the two welcome guests from all over the world to experience the beautiful cultures and traditions of Hawaii. In the meantime, a very young Manu and his brother also help their parents in running the resort. They welcome the guests wholeheartedly and make sure that everything is perfect. At one point, Manu's brother tells him that their grandma is looking for him. Confused, Manu immediately rushes towards his grandmother and asks her if everything is okay. In response, the latter just smiles and exclaims that she's perfectly fine. She then begins to tell Manu that the spirits of their ancestors reside upon every single leaf and flower in their land. Due to this very reason, they are supposed to protect their pious land and honor their ancestors. When Manu hears all this, he becomes extremely happy, but also slightly annoyed at the fact that his family just won't let him help them with anything. He complains that his support isn't appreciated at all. Upon hearing this, Manu's grandma tells him that he's too young to handle anything. She further explains that when the right time comes, he will also be expected to take care of the resort and continue preserving it. The scene now shifts back to the present, where Manu recalls his grandma's words and realizes that the time has finally come. He gently caresses the necklace she gave him and vows to never let his family down. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, a young ecologist named Sarah continues to live her life in the bustling city of California. At a lake nearby, she and her co-worker collect various samples for evaluation, whilst also talking about her upcoming trip to Hawaii. Sarah tells her colleague that her best friend's wedding is the most important thing to her, and because of that, she has to take a break from work. She then completes all her pending tasks and finally bids her co-worker goodbye. Shortly after, Sarah heads out and begins her journey to the beautiful island of Hawaii. In the meantime, Manu continues managing his hotel. He makes sure that everything is perfect, and even greets all the guests personally. Just as he's working, his brother, Noah, comes up from behind and starts messing around. The two have a friendly banter until their parents arrive at the scene. Manu, who's as excited as ever, eagerly tells his mother that everything is going pretty smoothly. They all discuss the resort's future plans. Back in California, Sarah quickly meets up with her friends and greets them happily. She then grabs all her stuff and gets in her best friend's van. All four girls cheer excitedly and talk about their plans whilst driving off to the airport. Soon, the girls reach their destination and check into Manu's resort. With all sorts of people having fun around them, Sarah and her friends eagerly enter the hotel. As expected, they run into Manu, who cheerily greets them with beautiful garlands. Sarah is initially surprised by the warm welcome, but eventually gets used to it. She thanks Manu for his service, observing the entire place. She then goes on to ask him about the clean water and beautiful plants all around the resort. Despite having a week off, Sarah continues working remotely and refuses to enjoy her vacation. This makes her friends annoyed, and so they ask her to relax during the entirety of the wedding. Moving forward, Manu hands Sarah the keys to her room and urges her to enjoy her stay. The latter agrees to do so and rushes towards her room. Manu is slightly intrigued by Sarah's behavior, but he quickly brushes it off and goes back to work. Later that day, whilst Manu is checking the reviews for his hotel, he notices that the eco rating is very poor. Despite being great at every other aspect, the resort has been very careless regarding the environment. This doesn't sit right with Manu, so he quickly approaches his parents and asks them about the issue. However, his concerns are just ignored by his parents. Instead of trying to be better, they ask Manu to continue running the resort like usual. They further try to explain that they have been trying to come up with a better solution, but right now, they don't have much to offer. This really irks Manu, so he tries to convince his parents to think of something. Sadly, his father asks him to stop and urges him to just focus on the task at hand. Meanwhile, Sarah and her best friend, Lydia, continue to enjoy themselves at the beach. Just as the two are relaxing, Lydia gets the news that her venue for the wedding rehearsal dinner has been cancelled. Now panicking, she begs Sarah to help her with the problem. Having no way out, the two girls immediately start thinking of other venues for the dinner. Sarah tries her best to help Lydia calm down, whilst also attempting to come up with a solution. She urges the latter to relax and assures her that everything will be perfect. Upon hearing this, Lydia takes a deep breath and puts all her trust in Sarah. Shortly after, Sarah rushes towards the hotel and approaches Manu. She tells him all about her dilemma and asks if he could help arrange a venue for the rehearsal dinner. Manu is initially surprised by the request and explains that arranging such a huge dinner in a very short amount of time is practically impossible. However, after a long thought, he agrees to help and immediately begins planning for the event. Sarah finally breathes a sigh of relief and offers to join Manu to plan the dinner. The very next day, Sarah tells Lydia that everything has been arranged. She then walks over to Manu, who informs her that he has already managed to rent a venue nearby. Hearing this, Sarah breathes a sigh of relief and asks him if they can examine the place before the rehearsal dinner. Manu readily agrees to that, and so the two immediately head out of the resort. They drive for quite a while, chatting along the way. Eventually, the two reach a beautiful restaurant. Sarah is extremely impressed by the place and thanks Manu for arranging the venue. She quickly books it and then begins planning the flowers and theme for the dinner. Manu quietly observes Sarah and, seeing the rush that she's in, he offers to help make the venue a little special, according to the bride's preferences. Sarah immediately agrees and praises him for being so thoughtful. In turn, Manu just smiles and begins driving back to the resort. When the two ultimately reach the hotel, Sarah texts Lydia and informs her that the venue has been decided. Lydia, who had been stressed out the entire time, finally breathes a sigh of relief and goes back to playing golf with her fiancé. In the meantime, Manu goes back to working as the manager. Whilst handling the hotel, he keeps thinking about ways to make the resort more eco-friendly and sustainable. Right then, the pool manager walks up to him and informs him that there's been a malfunction with the resort salination system. Hearing this, Manu rushes towards the affected area. That night, Sarah and all the other wedding attendees gather together by the pool and have a lot of fun. They celebrate the upcoming wedding and wish Lydia and her fiancé, Michael, all the best for their future. In response, the couple raise a toast to the resort and all their loved ones for being a part of this special occasion. Sarah just smiles at the sight of her best friend enjoying herself. On the other hand, Manu and the pool manager try to repair the broken salination system. However, they soon realize that the entire system is damaged, so they'll have to replace everything. In addition to that, fixing the entire thing will take about 2 weeks. When Manu realizes this, he scoffs in annoyance and tries to think of a better solution. Back at the pool, Sarah shows Lydia the venue and all the other arrangements. As expected, Lydia adores everything and thanks Sarah for her effort. She then bids the latter goodbye and goes back to her room. The next morning, Sarah approaches Manu again and asks him if he has any other venue in mind. Manu replies that he actually does, and even offers to take her there. However, that's when she notices Manu's discomfort. Concerned, she asks him if everything's okay. In response, Manu simply replies that the resort's salination system is broken, which has unfortunately caused them to shut off the main pool. Sarah grimaces upon hearing this and sympathizes with him. With no other option in mind, Manu asks Sarah if she has any opinions on the matter, since she's an ecologist. Sarah goes silent for a moment, but then brings up the idea of reverse osmosis. She explains the entire phenomenon to him, and says that a massive filter might help them. Sadly, this would cost a fortune, so Manu quickly backtracks from the idea. A while later, Manu's parents walk over to him and discuss a couple matters regarding the resort. After they leave, Manu tells Sarah all about the eco ratings. He even explains that his parents always ignore his suggestions. Hearing this, Sarah tells Manu that if he helps her find great venues for the wedding, she will definitely help him convince his parents to focus on improving the resort's sustainability. Manu readily agrees and begins searching for more venues for Lydia's wedding. Soon after, Manu goes over to his parents and talks to them about the repairs being done in the resort. They all talk for quite a while, until Manu gets distracted by Sarah, who just so happens to be getting lunch with Lydia. Whilst conversing, Manu keeps glancing at her and smiling. This intrigues his parents, but they just brush it off. Meanwhile, Sarah also continues looking at Manu. It's evident that the two find each other attractive. Lydia quickly notices this and teases Sarah about Manu. She jokingly exclaims that Manu is really attentive and upfront when it comes to helping her. Sarah just laughs at that and tries to explain that it's just his job to help the guests. However, Lydia doesn't buy it and eagerly asks more questions about him. Sarah happily answers them and then starts talking about the wedding. She tells Lydia that Manu has shortlisted a couple more venues for the wedding, and that they'll be observing them all before making any decision. After having a great time at lunch, Sarah goes back to the hotel and begins working on a new project. Since she's very passionate about her job, she is always engrossed in something related to work. She realizes that this has caused her to miss out on a lot of memories and quality time with her loved ones. However, detaching herself completely is quite literally impossible for her. The next morning, Manu accompanies Lydia and her friends to a beautiful location in the resort. There, he tells them all about the native flora and fauna found in the beautiful island of Hawaii. He even helps them engage in various fun activities, like making flower garlands and decorations. Whilst making the garlands, Manu sits beside Sarah and asks her about the venues. He tries to make sure that everything is perfect for the wedding and even offers to help with the arrangements. In response, Sarah thanks him for his generosity and continues chatting with him. Eventually, Manu finishes making his garland and offers it to Sarah, who very happily wears it. Now excited, Manu explains that the flower garland, which is also known as lei, is actually a symbol of friendship and affection. Upon hearing this, Sarah just smiles and realizes that she really likes him. Later on, whilst Manu is tending to the other guests at the resort, Sarah quietly approaches him and informs him that she's still working on finding viable solutions for the resort's broken salination system. Manu tells Sarah that he has also completed booking all the necessary venues for the wedding. The two then continue chatting about all the other preparations needed. While sighing, Sarah asserts that since she has never been a maid of honor before, she's really nervous about the arrangements and speeches for the wedding. In response, Manu tells her that she'll do great, and even offers to help her write her speech for the wedding. Moving forward, Sarah continues talking to Manu, and tells him all about her job. She expresses that working as an ecologist is quite tough, because there's so many things to do in order to make the world a better place. Hearing this, Manu assures Sarah by saying that she has already done quite a lot for the environment. He then applauds her for being so selfless, and urges her to continue her journey as an ecologist. A while later, Manu tells Sarah that he has to go and pluck out some harmful, invasive plants from the garden. Just as he's about to leave, Sarah stops him and asks if she could join him as well. Manu readily agrees to the request, and so the two quickly head over to the garden. Once there, they begin plucking out the invasive plants whilst also discussing the wedding. Sarah rants about the flowers and the theme that Lydia might prefer for her big day. She then talks about water-efficient techniques, which deeply inspires Manu. Thoroughly impressed, he praises her for being so intellectual, and even thanks her for all the help. Shortly after, Manu and Sarah bid each other goodbye and proceed to go back to their own tasks. However, just as they're leaving, Manu offers to take Sarah to his favorite restaurant the next day. The latter readily agrees and suggests that they meet each other at noon. The following day, Sarah and Manu get ready and drive over to a small food truck. There, Manu walks over to his best friend, Hinalu, who just so happens to be the food truck owner. Sarah greets Hinalu as well and chats with him for a little while. She then sits down at a table while Manu goes over to grab some lunch. Moments later, he returns with the food in his hand. Both Manu and Sarah eat their lunch with gusto and talk about how delicious it is. The two even talk about their childhoods and get to know each other better. Sarah opens up to Manu and explains that she has always moved a lot, because of which she doesn't exactly have a place that she can call home. She then adds that her father was a sailor, so their family was always really close to the water. As time passes, both Sarah and Manu talk about their hobbies and interests. Surprisingly, the two turn out to be very similar. They have a lot of fun together and get really close to one another. After having lunch, Manu takes Sarah to a gorgeous beach and tells her that the place is very close to his heart. He explains that whenever he felt scared or lonely, he'd come to the beach and relax. As the two continue talking, they realize that they like each other a lot. Both of them feel as though they've found someone who truly understands them. This further deepens the bond between them, ultimately causing love to blossom. As the movie progresses, Manu urges Sarah to have a little fun and proposes that the two swim in the glistening ocean. The pair have a great time swimming together. In the meantime, Manu's parents start looking around for him. They call him multiple times, but he doesn't answer. This causes them to get really worried and impatient. Seeing this, his brother Noah calls him as well. But it turns out that Manu has left his phone on the beach. He and Sarah appear to be way too busy with one another. They splash around in the water and observe all kinds of sea creatures. Eventually, the two head back to the resort. Whilst traveling, Sarah tells Manu that she wants to have the rehearsal dinner at the beach rather than a restaurant. She explains that the ocean has a familiar touch to it that Lydia would really like. Hearing this, Manu asks her if she's sure about her decision. Sarah replies that she is, and so, the two begin thinking of ideas for the beach rehearsal dinner. When the two finally reach the hotel, Sarah hugs Manu tightly and bids him goodbye. She then goes back to contacting several planners for the wedding. In the meantime, Manu calls Hinalu and excitedly tells him that he has fallen for Sarah. He further adds that he wants to ask her out, but since she's from California, dating one another would be almost impossible. Hearing this, Hinalu tells him that he should just give it a shot and see what happens. Manu agrees to the idea and thanks him for the advice. He then decides to follow his heart and quickly asks Sarah out for dinner. On the other hand, Sarah rushes over to Lydia and informs her that the rehearsal dinner has been fully planned. She then tells her best friend that Manu has asked her out, so she will be joining him for dinner. As expected, Lydia squeals in excitement and wishes Sarah all the best. Shortly after, Sarah gets a call from her boss stating that a new opportunity has popped up. She explains that the project is a 2-month-long job with a pretty intense schedule. Sarah initially thinks of agreeing, but then stops herself. Unsure of what to do, she tells her boss that she'll reach out later with her decision. Some time later, Sarah heads over to the beach and tries to come up with a speech for Lydia. However, that's when she realizes that she has been overthinking a lot. Instead of trying to make everything perfect, she decides to just go with the flow. She lets go of her stress and proceeds to have fun with her best friends. At the same time, Manu happily tends to the guests at the hotel. However, his excitement is cut short when his parents approach him and tell him that they all need to have a serious conversation. It turns out that the resort's salination system suddenly imploded. Not only will this result in financial loss, but all the guests are also at a serious risk. Hearing this, Manu starts panicking and hurriedly tries to come up with a solution. He closes off the pool and informs all the guests about the mishap. Later that night, Sarah dresses up and gets ready for her date. Clearly excited, she proceeds to walk out of her room. But that's when she gets a message from Manu stating that the pool has been closed off. He further adds that it's too late now, so he doesn't really need her help anymore. Sarah is distraught by the news. Before she can even respond, a devastated Manu postpones their date and apologizes for his behavior. Sarah understands the situation. Now frustrated, she sits down on her bed and goes back to working. The next morning, Sarah tries to approach Manu, but after seeing his distress, she quietly walks away. It's evident that the entire situation has put a massive strain on their bond. Soon after, Lydia and Michael's rehearsal dinner commences. All the guests present there have a great time with one another. Even Lydia absolutely loves the arrangement, so she gleefully thanks Sarah for her effort. Right at that moment, Manu arrives at the scene and quietly observes the event. Sarah quickly takes this opportunity to approach him, but things soon start to get awkward between the two, so they get back to their tasks. Finally, the wedding day arrives and a very excited Sarah wakes Lydia up. Stoked, she wishes Lydia all the best for her future. The latter thanks her for everything and suggests that the two unwind at the beach before getting ready for the wedding. After a brief conversation, Lydia asks Sarah all about her date with Manu, only to find out that the date was cancelled. Sarah explains that since Manu doesn't need her help anymore, there's no reason for them to hang out. She further adds that there's no romantic connection between them either. Hearing this, Lydia simply sighs. Meanwhile, Manu goes to the beach and remembers his grandma's teachings. He tries to stay strong for the resort and begins researching ways to fix the salination system. After working for quite a bit, he looks through the suggestion box nearby and finds a note from Sarah. In the note, she asks him to approach his parents directly and tell them what he really feels. Towards the end, she thanks him for the beautiful memories. Manu is touched by the note and decides to have a serious talk with his parents. On the other hand, Lydia and her bridal party drink champagne and reminisce about the time they had at the resort. They all start getting ready for the main event and cheer in excitement. At the same time, Manu sternly approaches his parents and pours his heart out to them. He tells them that the resort and the island are not only their home, but their livelihood and culture as well. Ignoring problems related to the resort would be ignoring the well-being of their family. He further explains that there are a lot of changes that need to be made to the resort, and he will not rest until he does what really needs to be done. Upon hearing all this, Manu's parents agree with him and allow him to do what he thinks is right. They are thoroughly impressed by his motivation and feel as though their son has finally matured enough to take over the resort. Back at the beach, the wedding ceremony commences, and Manu arrives at the scene as well. He glances at Sarah and smiles. Lydia finally walks down the aisle, and the couple get married. Everyone cheers for them as they kiss each other passionately. That night, the reception party is held, where all the guests dance around joyously. They raise toasts for the newly married couple and enjoy themselves to the fullest. At one point, Sarah walks over to the main stage and begins her speech. She smiles awkwardly and proceeds to praise Lydia for being an incredible friend. She then talks about all the things she learned after coming to Hawaii. In the end, she puts flower garlands on both Lydia and Michael and wishes them all the best for their future. The entire audience erupts in cheers and claps before proceeding to dance the night away. While all the guests dance around and have the time of their lives, Sarah quietly walks away and glances over at the ocean. She then lets her flower garland flow away with the water. Manu and his family quietly watch her as she does so, and smile amongst themselves. The very next morning, Sarah packs up to check out of the hotel. However, just before leaving, she walks over to the beach for the very last time and remembers all of the memories she made on the island. Meanwhile, Manu continues catering to the guests at the hotel. Just as he's working, Noah walks over to him and tells him that their parents are looking for him. Confused, Manu rushes over to see what the issue is. On the other hand, Sarah and her friends proceed to walk out of the hotel. Whilst Lydia and all other girls get into a massive van, Sarah stays back and starts looking for Manu, who just so happens to be in a meeting with his parents. During the meeting, he inquires about the new project that they're about to start. In response, his parents gleefully tell him that they're ready to fund any upgrades required to make the resort better. They tell him that he can continue with his plan regarding smart locks, sustainability, and a better salination system. As expected, Manu profusely thanks his parents for the opportunity and assures them that he will not let them down. Shortly after the meeting, Manu notices Sarah, so he immediately rushes over to her. With a smile on his face, he asks her if she's ready to leave. Sarah replies that she is, and thanks Manu for everything that he's done for her. In response, Manu puts a beautiful garland on her and thanks her for the suggestions. He then excitedly tells her that his parents love his idea and are happy to upgrade the resort. Sarah congratulates Manu for his success and wishes him all the best for the future. That's when Manu expresses that he'd love to keep her around for a bit longer. He further adds that he really likes her and wants to take her out on a date. Upon hearing this, Sarah just smiles and reveals that she's actually extending her vacation. She explains that she wants to create a few more memories before going back to work again. As expected, Manu cheers in excitement and pulls Sarah closer to him. He caresses her face gently and then kisses her. The movie finally ends with Manu and Sarah expressing their feelings to one another and starting a new chapter of their lives.